Morning. Did you introduce me? I didn't recognize myself. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. I just flew in from Los Angeles, and unfortunately, as you all know, airplanes are germ factories. We all ought to wear masks when we get on an airplane. So I have a little bit of a cold, but I'll try really hard to... Can you hear me? Okay, great. Let's get started. I was told to ask how many of you are Rotarians. Would you raise your hands? Oh, my. The reason I was asked that is I teach ethics, and it's my understanding that the four-way test is something that I should include with all of my students who have no idea what ethics is about. It's really quite interesting. I last taught in Dubai, and I had 200 students and from 31 countries, which is really interesting to try to do that. And some of the students were from India, some from Germany, some from China, some from, and you may have seen a photograph or a video of parents climbing up the wall to give their sons and daughters the crib papers to cheat on their exams in order to get into school. So the competition for grades is so intense that when we start talking about ethics, their eyes glaze over. My subject's not going to be about ethics today at all. I'm going to be talking to you about innovation and about your role in dealing with some dilemmas. But first, I wanted to just say that it's exciting for me to know that Minnesota is one of two states in the United States that's doing really quite well. Your unemployment rate is lower than practically every other state in the country, and happily, you're able to deal with this weather. Out in California, I mentioned I'm from Minnesota, and people look at you and say, "Isn't it cold there? Aren't you freezing?" And I went to see The Revenant and during the 40-degree below temperature, and Leonardo DiCaprio has nothing on all of you. You're heroes to put up with this weather, I'll tell you. We're talking about the subject of leadership and innovation. And yesterday I checked Google to see how much had been written on leadership and innovation this past year. Now, the number of articles is astounding. Hundreds and thousands of articles about leadership and innovation. Now, some of the articles rang true, some were questionable, and most simply repackaged conventional wisdom because, guess what? We really can't define it. We can't define it. We can try to achieve it. We know it when we see it. But defining leadership is a very, very challenging task. Now, I want to make sure I know how to use the device here. I want you to put things into a little perspective before we start talking about innovation and leadership. The past few years have been really quite difficult for many people in this country. We've been clawing ourselves out of a record financial disaster. And unfortunately, for not all reasons that we can understand, there continues to be a slowdown for us. Now, for generations, Lady Liberty at the entrance of the New York Harbor has held her torch high, offering everybody the opportunity to achieve, to succeed, and to prosper. But things have changed a little bit. I'm not running for office, so I would not be able to manage things in Iowa, believe me. But the top 130 families in the United States control 50% of the wealth in our country. 50% of the wealth. More than 41 states, excluding New York and California. The concentration of wealth makes things complicated for us Because, let me give you one example. Who's been to New York in this room? Okay, all of you have taken one of those yellow taxi cabs. And on the hood of that cab is a medallion, which is welded to the hood. 3 years ago, a medallion went for somewhere in the neighborhood of $500,000. That to have the right to have a cab operating in New York City. Today, those same medallions are practically worthless because of something called Uber and something called Lyft. So the transfer of that wealth has gone from hundreds and thousands of taxi cabs to people in Silicon Valley who operate an innovation. And that is happening at warp speed in our country, which means that we're going to have to focus on being smarter, moving quicker, being more creative, working more than we already work. And by the way, we work more in the United States than any other country in the world. And in France, they had a strike recently simply because people were expected to work 35 hours a week, believe it or not. So we've got a long way to go. And so let me start by talking a little bit about, there. Ignite 2016. Ignite 2016. That's our subject. And I want to start with 5 eyes. 5 eyes. Now I used can you hear me? I used eyes simply because they're graphically attractive, but I really mean the letter I. Okay. The first, imagination. The second, idea. The third, invention. The fourth, innovation. And the fifth, intelligence, and most especially emotional intelligence. So, imagination. All of us dream about things, especially children. We have fantastic things that go through our heads. And lo and behold, after we imagine, maybe an idea will pop into our heads. And we'll think, that's great. That sounds like a good idea. Isaac Newton was under a tree. We all know what happened. An apple fell on his head. Boom. That apple fell down. Why? I have an idea. Gravity. Okay. Invention is applying that idea into a mechanical device. Here we have a coffee cup with cookies under it. That's a pretty interesting idea. It's generally patented, although patents have become kind of a problem in our country simply because pharmaceutical companies and others are using patents in ways that were not intended. But that notwithstanding, an invention is the creation of an idea into a mechanical device or process. Innovation is something that is quite different. Innovation is taking an invention and applying it in a way, like this lightning in a bottle, that someone will want to pay for, someone will want to buy. That's what an innovation is. Okay? Bill Gates took the invention that IBM had, the MS-DOS system, and created Microsoft. Steve Jobs has never invented much of anything. The mouse and much of the computer stuff that he generated was created by Xerox at PARC out in California. What he did was to package that, increase excitement, and make you want to spend your good money for an iPhone 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and who knows what. Okay? So innovation really is the application of an invention or idea into some process, product, or something that people will be willing to pay for. That's the innovation. Okay? Now, once we have the innovation, we have to use our intelligence and our emotional intelligence, which Judy talked about this morning, in order to have implementation. And that's another I, but I didn't put it up there because I was afraid 6 eyes would make you crazy. Okay? So, now we're ready for ignition, which is the 7th I. Okay? So you can see that we go from imagination to idea to invention to innovation to using our intelligence for implementation so that we can ignite and move forward. So, but there are some dilemmas that we face. I rather call them choice points because the dilemma is kind of negative. So I'm going to go through these with you, and bear with me because I think you'll see how these 9 choice points affect our ability to move forward with our innovation using our intelligence. Okay? A dilemma, we know what that is. 2 assumptions, you can do one thing or you can do the other, but you can't do both. That's the dilemma part of it. So I'd like to use choice points. So why don't we say that a choice point is you have to decide which of the 2 things you're going to do. Right. The first is broad-based versus high visibility leadership. You can be forceful and dynamic, and the more forceful and dynamic you are, the more likely you are to silence someone who has something to contribute. Or if you're too reflective and too deliberate, it may signal too little energy or commitment. I think there's a guy named Ben Carson. Okay, so getting yourself between too forceful and dynamic, where you're going to silence others, or too reflective and deliberate and listening too much, is a dilemma or a choice point for you. You got to fit yourself where that works best in your particular organization or situation. That's choice point number 1. Choice point number 2, K-SACS, that's not a disease, versus soft skills. In order to be a manager, in order to be a leader, you have to have some technical skills because our world is so global and high-tech. So, knowledge, skills, abilities, and competencies are the K-SACS. But you can be as smart as a whip unless you have the soft skills that you need to relate to others, to listen to others, to interact with others. Then all of this brainy stuff that you have is of little import. And you have to figure out a way to balance your knowledge, skills, abilities, and competencies with your relationships, your interactions, your ability to get along with others and work in teams. Okay? The real trick, balancing both. The third one is going it alone versus being a team player. If you're an entrepreneur, you want to show off your ideas and you want your brand to stand out there. On the other hand, you don't want to be a glory hog and take all the credit when others are making a contribution as well. That is a choice point for you. How do you balance the 2? Okay. Number 4, your gut versus your head. And this is an important one. In the first 30 seconds that you meet someone, you decide what you think about them, whether you like them or dislike them. You decide that within 30 seconds. The rest of the time that you interact, you spend trying to justify or validate your first impression. All of us do that. Okay? On the other hand, we have to use our head to sort out our unconscious biases, our prejudices, which are not based in fact. So, our first impression is important, and our judgments are often correct. But if we don't use our head to sort out our biases, because we all have them, then we're going to really get into this false positive, false negative paradox. Now, I wish I had more time, and I don't want the guy to pull up the card and say you're running out of time, so I'll just quickly say that a false positive is you like somebody, you hire them, and they're a disaster. False positive, you chose them, they didn't work out. A false negative is, well, in Spanish they have, for fish, I love that language, they have 2 words for fish. Peix are the fish that are floating out in the ocean, and a pescado is the fish that you catch. So, a false negative is all these fish out there, and you didn't choose one of them that could have cured cancer, created a wonderful situation for you simply because you made a mistake. False positives are more expensive, but false negatives really impact innovation. The fifth one is long-term versus short-term perspective. If you use a long lens, you may overlook what's directly in front of you. On the other hand, if you use a short lens, you can ignore future opportunities. Okay? Long lens versus short lens. The fifth one is creativity versus discipline. You can be as creative as you want to be. Creativity is a wonderful thing. But you must be disciplined if you're going to make your creative ideas work for you. There is a disease called idea-rhea. That's having so many ideas that they flow all over and you never get anything accomplished and you get nothing done. So balancing creativity and discipline. Okay? The seventh is change versus trust. This is a big one. You can be as positive change. Any kind of change weakens trust, because we're in our country right now, we're going through so much change, nobody trusts anybody. It's really quite astounding how all the change makes us distrustful. On the other hand, if you don't trust, then it's impossible for you to do much with change. And that's a dilemma, a big dilemma. Quickly, before he pours up this other sign here, when a change begins, we go through, oh no, it can't be. They can't be that stupid. Well, maybe they're not. Well, I will ultimately accept that change. All of us go through that whenever a change occurs. The eighth is revenue growth versus cost containment. Okay? That is, it costs money to make money, but you can spend yourself out of business to buy growth. And that's a dilemma. The ninth is productivity versus quality of life. You want to be 110% productive. In the United States, people work night and day. I was on a beach recently, and I noticed the guy there with his cell phone and a pager lying out on the beach because although he was on vacation, he was on call 24 hours a day. Okay? But what about a life? Your family, outside interests, community service, like the Rotarians are engaged in their organization, the fruits of your labor, balancing those things. That's a dilemma. So, this is the 29th of January. We got 336 days and counting. We can lift off because really in the final analysis, it's all about you. You're the ones who are going to have to do it. Nobody can do it for you. I invite you to lift off for Ignition 2016. Thank you.